Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, desolates, sirs, peasants, vassals, potheads, stoners. I'm a useful idiot, and today I want to talk about pot legalization in the United States and why now. And this is a question that I'm asking because, of course, the idea of legalizing drugs has been on the table for discussion most of my life here in the United States, some 50 years. And the fact that we now have this occurring is a very interesting cultural change in the United States. And so I'm going to look at it a little bit closer, find out why now. Some of the reasons are obvious, and some of the reasons are less obvious. But we know there's a huge shift going on now because of two factors. One, the fact that Colorado, the state of Colorado, and Washington State have both legalized recreational pot. And not only are both states moving forward with this rapidly, but Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States Justice Department, announced that he will not challenge Washington State and Colorado. So this is huge. This opens the doors for a national movement for the legalization of marijuana. And we're already seeing the results of this. States like California, Oregon, Maine, Alaska are all lining up efforts to legalize pot there as well. And I can easily see this movement having pot legalized in most of certainly the West Coast and parts of the Northeast as well. It's hard to imagine, however, pot being legalized in a lot of the Bible Belt states and southern states, but I could be wrong. The temperament of the country has probably changed a lot. And part of that, we can see a little evidence is places like Kentucky, where the hemp industry is being encouraged. And so the legalization of pot has also opened the doors for a return of the hemp industry. So this will also be a factor in a lot of these other states as far as legalization is concerned. And so we've had this prohibition in American life for pot for 100 years now, and now we see this change. So, and a lot of the traditional foes are still out there, and that's another reason why it's intriguing that the paper industry and the lumber industry and the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the alcohol industry and the cigarette industries all had a stake in making sure that pot wasn't legalized. But of course the climate and landscape has changed across the globe now, and these industries are now set to profit from this change and not necessarily see it as an enemy. And we see that a lot in corporate America these days, and banks. They used to compete, and now they collude. They find it a lot more lucrative, and so that's what we'll see here now too. Why not? We see the black market drug industry globally still firing on all pistons, including the U.S. condoned opium production in Afghanistan now, which was nearly eradicated under the Taliban, and is now once again producing records amount of poppies and heroin across the globe. But anyway, let's get back to pot. So we now have two announcements that the drug policy in the United States is making a radical shift. One of them I've already talked about, and that's the fact that the United States government is not going to challenge Colorado and Washington. This will open the door to a lot more legal pot states. But the other one, oddly enough, is the mainstream media's doctor du jour, Sanjay Gupta, has reversed his position on pot. Now is a pot advocate. And in the scheme of things, it's a small thing, but the way that our society works now, Sanjay Gupta is speaking for the handlers. So before he spoke for the handlers against pot, and now that the handlers have changed their position, now he will speak for pot. So those are the two cultural signals that something has changed in a big way. So let's start looking at some of the reasons why pot would be legalized now, and I'll save the best for last. So one thing, we will have tourism. People will come from all over the world to enjoy the pot industry in the United States, and particularly now that we have Amsterdam, which was traditionally a hot spot for pot tourists, now they have cracked down on tourists coming there to enjoy pot. But we also see that Holland and Portugal have served as an example of pot legalization really not causing the fall of civilization. In fact, it had a lot of positive effects. So tourism is one thing, and as I mentioned earlier, the hemp industry, the return of the hemp industry could have a lot of advantages, and particularly if corporate America and giant agribusiness is in position to benefit from it as well. And then we have possibility of export-import business. Like I said before, tobacco and pharmaceuticals are now positioned to try and capitalize on pot legalization. And no tobacco companies are already creating their own corporate marijuana brands. And it seems likely that some way they'll find a legal way to export those across state lines and around the world. So that will probably be ensconced in all these trade agreements that are going on. And then oddly enough, I think in some ways legalizing pot will help stabilize Mexico. And in the long run, the way the U.S. has worked with and against certain drug cartels in Mexico has become an archaic model. And I think now, if we can legalize pot in the United States, that could help stabilize Mexico, and it would facilitate the North American Union, the fabled North American Union that's been discussed for a while between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the foundations have already been laid for that, and I think part of the quotient would be to stabilize Mexico. So this could potentially be part of that. And then we also have freeing up the finances and resources of the police and the prison industry. Of course, the drug war and the war on pot has been a real cash cow for the police, but now they can just shift everything into terrorism. Terrorism can be the new cash cow for the police, and then we can free up a lot of federal prison space by getting out nonviolent pot violations. I think something like 80% of people in federal prisons, in the highest prison population in the world. So perhaps they're finally willing to address that issue as well. Of course, maybe they need to free up prison space for a lot more people who will be labeled as terrorists and such. Who knows? And then we also have the potential for everything to move into recreational pot. And I'm seeing that here in Washington State. We already have the potential that the medicinal pot industry will be regulated out of business as the recreational pot business takes over. One of the reasons is because as a commercial product, it can be taxed a lot heavier. And that's one of the issues we're having here in Washington, whether to tax medicinal pot, whether to tax recreational pot at the same level. And of course, legally taxing medicine would be inappropriate. So I think this will be a way that the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies will get rid of the medicinal pot industry. I still can't decide whether they want to be part of it or whether they want to try and eliminate it as competition. And I'm sure they've positioned themselves for both possibilities. So that's an interesting development. And then, of course, there's the possibility that maybe under certain circumstances, the government would prefer to have pot available to people to medicate and sedate the population even more. So everybody has access to alcohol, but imagine if pot was legalized, perhaps the Occupy Wall Street movement would look a little different with clouds of pot smoke wafting over the park. And so anyway, I I find that humorous to even suggest, but on the other hand, in this day and age, we don't want to rule out the possibility that they're thinking about helping to sedate the population. And then, of course, the bottom line, the one that we all know of that is the most likely, and as my friend Bert would point out, first thing, and that is follow the money. And the money in this case is promises of huge tax revenue for taxing and selling and regulating pot. And that's the most likely scenario, because that's the only reason Prohibition ended. The Prohibition on alcohol from 1919 to 1934 wasn't because necessarily anything else had changed other than the fact that the Depression had happened, the stock market crash, and they saw a ready source of a lot of tax revenue. And that's why it's probably the main reason that booze was reinstated legally. And pot has enjoyed pretty much the same status as alcohol then, even when it was outlawed. It was readily available, and the market would dictate price. And that's one of the things we have to consider as well as far as tax revenue. This is going to be a big money generator for a lot of these states, and that's another thing that will probably push more and more states to embrace this. Seeing the kind of money generated. So after everybody sees what happens in Colorado and Washington and the amount of money generated for the state, then we will see. And we'll see state after state fall in line to get this tax revenue, because that's what it's all about. Money, 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 money. So anyway, those are my speculations as to why now, why the drug war is ending now, and why there's an interest in a national movement to legalize pot. Who would have thought? I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.